two of the big questions that I think Browns fans have after they have drafted everybody, after they have made their big initial free agency moves, are what's going to happen with Jadeveon Clowney, who's still a free agent, who's still out there, and what's going to happen with Jarvis Landry, who's still a free agent and still out there. Now, those are the only two I'm mentioning right now because, quite honestly, those are the only two that are still really heavily linked to Cleveland. As much as people hype up the ideal of what Odell coming back, it's just doesn't seem like it's in the cards from everything that Odell have said past this situation and everything that we have seen from the Cleveland Browns. It just doesn't seem very likely that they're gonna go in that direction. Also, when it comes to anybody else, again, similar ideal there. So it really comes down to Jarvis Landry and Jadeveon, who we know there's been an offer extended out to Jadeveon Clowney, reportedly. And we know that Jarvis Landry is down to either the Saints or the Browns, reportedly, in their selection. So what did this draft week mean for those two players? Because a lot of people are noticing the Browns drafted a pass rusher and they drafted a wide receiver. Are those the replacements for Jadeveon Clowney and Jarvis Landry? And I'm going to say no for a couple of reasons. Now, let's start with Jarvis Landry because I think that's the most interesting conversation because David Bell is a more ready player, a more polished player and more well-known player who would need to step into that role, right? And I can see where people are coming from when they say this because you look at David Bell and you see some similarities to Jarvis Landry when it comes to testing, even though I don't think they play similarly at all. I think their testing is similar, right? Where they weren't the fastest guys, but they showed a lot more on tape than they showed on test. So that makes sense there. Also, there's only so much room in that wide receiving room. They got Amari Cooper. You know they're going to keep Schwartz. You know they're going to keep Donovan Peoples-Jones. Jakeem Grant's going to return kicks and do some things for this offense. So you're really talking about a couple of slots there for wide receiver. How much room would there be left if they brought in Jarvis Landry on top of that? And I get that. Understand that David Bell is much cheaper than Jarvis Landry and all of those things. But at the end of the day, this is not a question about finances. This is not a question about potential. This is more of a question about who do you want to rely on, right? Because if David Bell is asked to play a role in this offense, he's going to be asked to be relied on. Are you ready in a year where you have invested the most that you have in the quarterback position, the most that you have had on offense? Are you ready to, depend on a third round pick and not even your first third round pick, your last third round pick? Are you willing to depend on that? Is that the kind of confidence that you will inspire? I could understand if this were the 44th pick or if this were the 14th pick, right? That they were going to trust and put all that into. But the Browns, quite frankly, their expectations are too high to go into the camp expecting a 99th pick to, carry significant weight for this team. Not saying that it can't happen or that it would be bad if it does, but most teams don't go into the season that have Super Bowl hopes that are also, hoping on a third round pick, the 99th pick in the draft, to carry some significant weight for them, right? If it happens, and that's cool. But you don't go into the season planning for that. And right now, with the wide receiving situation, you would go into the season kind of planning and hoping that David Bell pans out as the 99th pick in the draft, which there's no guarantee. There's no guarantees in the draft regardless, but there's really no guarantees after the second round. Like, it's just more or less a guess at that point. And sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have a good feeling, sometimes you don't, right? But that's the biggest question, right? Would you be willing to depend on, not depend, but rely on David Bell, knowing that, you didn't really invest the most in him? And would it make sense to say, hey, Let's have a security blanket in Jarvis Landry. If we can get away with giving him $6 to $8 million for this year, we will. And that's worth it, because at the end of the day, Jarvis Landry will be worth that value as a locker room leader and as a mentor to these wide receivers, regardless of how much production he gets. And then outside of that, he's probably going to be worth it money-wise, right? I think we have forgotten Jarvis has been nicked up and banged up for the last few years. He's played under those injuries, and he's had decent production under those injuries. And also, last year, everybody's wide receiving production on the Cleveland Browns was just all-time low. So, and that was for a specific reason at the quarterback position, and a lot of the things that were just going wrong there, especially at the end of the year. So I think some of that kind of leaned into why people think he's on the decline. But I still think you got a couple of good years left in Jarvis Landry. And I don't know why people would assume that he's the type of player that would age out, given that athleticism has never been why he's been good at football. He's always been a skill guy, a will guy instead of a speed guy. So I think Jarvis is one of them wide receivers who could play till he's like 35, 36. I think he's got a ton of good football left in him. And if I'm the Cleveland Browns, I would prefer to re-up on that and bet on that versus betting on David Bell, who I'm sure in a couple of years is going to be ready to be a really good wide receiver in the NFL. But I have no idea if he's going to be ready day one, because expecting a dude who's selected 99th to be ready day one is just not unfair. It's just unfair. My bad. It's just kind of unfair, given that that's not the real expectation for a third round pick. Like, you're happy if he can start, but you're not expecting a third round pick to start, and that's just the reality of it, right? We're not really expecting Martin Emerson to start, the cornerback that they drafted, right? We're not going to expect him to be a real contributing starter. I mean, some of us are, but I feel like it's not realistic. Why would we expect the 99th pick to start and play a big role? That just doesn't make very much sense unless it's by necessity. And it doesn't have to be by necessity, because you have some options in free agency that would make it so you don't need to start and rely on a rookie. Now let's go on to the other side of the ball. Jadeveon Clowney. Does this draft help or hurt Jadeveon Clowney's ability to come back for the Cleveland Browns? In some aspects, I can understand why people would say it would hurt, because you already got Chase Winovich, you already have Alex Wright, so you have your two guys, your one backup and your one developmental piece. And, they might feel like that's the solution there, opposite of Miles. I would be highly suspect of that being the solution there. I mean, Alex Wright is not a pick that I love, so that is what it is. Hopefully, I'm wrong on that. And Chase Winovich, I like Chase Winovich, but Chase Winovich is more of a Takk McKinley replacement than a Jadeveon Clowney replacement. And again, you will be doing the thing that you've been doing to Myles Garrett, which is not giving him any help, right? We saw what happens when you give Myles Garrett help last year. He almost won Defensive Player of the Year. But when you don't give Myles Garrett help, you open a guy who's already susceptible to being triple teamed, who's already susceptible to being held without any flags being called on him for whatever reason, and then you're subjecting him to more punishment, right? More people on him. It's not good for Myles Garrett's health long term to be relied upon this heavily. So I don't think that that's what Andrew Berry's plan is. I think that them taking a developmental guy, like I believe Alex Wright to be, because there's no way you're going to tell me that you think that dude should start day one, as raw as his skill set is. And honestly, how much growth he has to show as a pass rusher in order to be serviceable in the NFL. You're not going to tell me that's a starter right away. And you desperately need a starter opposite of him. And who's the best guy on the market right now? It's Jadeveon Clowney. He wants to come back, or at least he's open to it on the right price. And it would make a ton of sense because him and Myles Garrett fit together like gloves. Like, they fit perfectly on top of each other. So I think that one is closer, in my opinion. I'm not reporting anything. In my opinion, closer to getting done than any of the other deals that we have talked about, especially like Jarvis Landry, where I could see in a world where they just say, hey, man, we'll just wing it with the wide receivers we got, trust Donovan Peoples-Jones more, and then put him in that role and then put David Bell under him. I can see that. But when it comes to Jadeveon, like, it's almost at a they better bring him back if they can at all costs, because if they don't, they're going to be in significant trouble. Because you can see it one or two ways. You bring back Jadeveon, and all of a sudden you got Alex Wright developing in the background. Chase Winovich is going to come in off rotation. You still got Joe Jackson, I believe, who can come in there and be a backup. And he's serviceable. And you got Porter Gustin, so you're fine there. And then you'll have the interior spots, which, hey, you might want to sign another veteran because you only really got one good defensive tackle in this year's draft, and Perrion Winfrey, but you can put him next to Perrion, rotate Perrion in with, I don't know if you'll rotate him with Tommy Togiai, but like Tommy Togiai is basically the same thing where he's more of a pass rusher than a run stuffer. So you probably want to get a run stuffer. So Akeem Hicks or somebody like that, or maybe you put Taven Bryan on that other spot and you trust him. And that's the rotation, and that's a fine defensive line rotation. It's not overpowering by any means, but it's fine. It's good. It'll get the job done. You will not have a deficiency at the defensive line. But all of a sudden, you don't bring back Clowney, and you're relying on Taven Bryan, Perrion Winfrey, and Myles Garrett. That other edge spot being that weak is going to hurt you, right? So that's my biggest concern about that right now. So as far as those two go, after the draft, where would I put the percentages that they come back? Jarvis Landry, I'm feeling this is at a 35% chance that gets done. I think there is a stronger chance that he ends up elsewhere, but I do think there is a strong chance that he stays in Cleveland for a couple of reasons, right? The reasons I think he would stay: one, it's an offense that he's familiar with and has been very productive in. Two, it's a place where he feels home. You know, he has a natural role already as a leader. And this is an offense that is switching over leadership. So his help would be valuable there. And he would offer a service in being a veteran wide receiver that, you know, Amari Cooper, not the most vocal guy. So you want a more vocal guy in there to help mentor some of these wide receivers or relate to some of these wide receivers who might have the tendency to be a little bit more vocal than what you would expect out of an Amari Cooper. So the value's there. It makes sense. Some of the reasons why it might not happen, I don't know if there's bad blood between the Browns not wanting to keep his contract. I don't know if that's something that bugs Jarvis. I don't know if there's something that happened with Odell during the season that has rubbed Jarvis the wrong way, right? So some of the stuff relationship-wise within the building might not be where it needs to be in order for that relationship to continue, but if we're just talking about strictly football situation stuff, then that makes sense. But, you know, sometimes things are bigger than football for certain players, for all players, and that can get in the way too. So we'll see what happens there. Jadeveon Clowney, I think this is at a 50-50 chance, right? It makes sense for the Browns. I think it makes a ton of sense for Jadeveon Clowney. I just don't see where it wouldn't make sense for him. I don't see where he gets more money, because I don't think another team needs him as much as the Cleveland Browns need him. So I think this makes sense, right? 50-50 is about as high as you can go for a free agent proposition, because you just never know that other half of the equation for a player. But when it comes to Jadeveon, that's the one I would feel the best about. That hey, the Browns bring one back, it's probably going to be Jadeveon. I think it's a good chance that they bring back both, but that's where I'm at. Let me know where you're at. Do you want the Browns to bring back both of these players? Do you want to bring back just one of them? Let me know in the comment section below. And what percentage do you think that it's likely that they come back? Let me know what you feel down there. I'll be sure to check it out. But you guys have a great day and have a good night.